All right. Good morning, Doug. We want to talk about the situation in Africa. And by this situation, I'm talking about the situation in Niger. 2 weeks ago, there was a coup where the democratically elected president was overthrown by and is being held under house arrest by a military junta. The lay of the land now, as I understand, is there's a couple of other West African nations that are supporting this military junta. That's Burkina Faso and Mali, which have their own issues. We talk about that too. And then the other side of the equation, you have the West and their proxies there, these West African states that are all part of this ECOWAS economic trading bloc. Victoria Nuland went there to save the day again, just like she has a great history of doing. And she wanted to see the big man in charge now, and whose name I have here written down. Tiani, I think, General Tiani. Wanted to see him. They refused to meet with her. She also wanted to see the now deposed president. They didn't allow her to see him either. And then she left, making a few veiled threats. And now people are wondering if there's going to be airstrikes, or if ECOWAS is going to take action, to return democratic leadership to the country. What are your thoughts on this situation?
Well, this is really a tempest in a toilet bowl, frankly. To start with, none of these countries are real countries to start with. And we can go down the list of these countries. They're all artificially constructed. Absolutely every one of these countries was put together in the boardrooms of Europe, where colonial powers are drawing lines on maps and had never even been to these places. I mean, I used to collect stamps as a kid, and in the 1950s and before, these French territories, and they're mostly French in West Africa, were divided into French Equatorial Africa, French West Africa, and I think there was another one. And then they broke them up into individual countries completely arbitrarily. So my question is, why is everything blowing up over a simple coup in Niger? All of these countries, no exceptions, have had lots of coups since they went independent. All of them have had coups. And it's usually, and if they have a democratic election, it's always in the African model, one man, one vote, one time, until a coup takes over. Almost always military guys take it over. So, I mean, this is standard operating procedure for actually the whole continent, but certainly West Africa. So why are they making such a big deal out of this one this time? Because Niger, I mean, we talk about, one of the nice things about Trump is he popularized the word shithole in regards to nothing, nowhere countries. And I don't know, there's 54 countries in Africa. I guess I've been to like half of them. I'll have to count it up someday. I haven't been to Niger, but there's nothing in Niger as far as I can determine. Nothing. And they have this group called ECOWAS, African Economic, whatever it stands for. Kind of like an opportunity for the bigwigs in these countries to get together and party with other bigwigs. But there's no economic viability to a country like Niger. I mean, ECOWAS, what is it going to facilitate trade so that the Nigerians can go to the Malians and say, okay, I'll trade you 3 goats for 2 sheep. And that's about the level of it. There's nothing in the country. It's desert,
Mm.
or actually Sahel, which is like not quite, classic Saharan sand dunes, but it's like the worst parts of Arizona.
Mm.
There's nothing, but it's really hot.
Well, I mean, what about? I mean, there are mines or minerals, right, which are exported because I did read about the uranium. They export a tremendous amount of uranium specifically to France. Their former colonial overlords.
I think uranium is about the only economic mineral that they have there.
Hmm.
But is it important? No, it's not, because uranium is, and I'm a huge fan of uranium. I think it's going to wind up going back to $150 a pound, which it was in the good old days. But it's a drug on the market now at roughly $55 a pound, where it is now. So it's not strategic or important. There's lots of uranium around at reasonable prices today.
Okay, so how about this then? There are apparently the U.S. has 2 air bases in Niger. One of them is their major drone air base that they have. And they use it for all their counterterrorism stuff. As they say, there's new Al Qaeda or related parties, that are in this Sahel. Is that how you say it? That area,
Yes.
that whole region.
Yes.
Yes, that are
Yeah.
terrorizing and are threats to democracy or something. So they need drone bases there. And I was reading this one article from, I guess it was last year, where this Air Force, the highest enlisted ranking official with the Air Force was, it was an article about her visit to the troops that are there. And there's something like 1,200, I think, U.S. troops in Niger right now.
In Niger. About the same number, incidentally, are in Mali, which is apparently aligning itself with Niger.
Well, yeah. So there still are 1,200 troops in Mali. Is that right?
Mm. That's what I read.
Okay.
Not that I believe much of what I read, but yes. My question is, what in hell are American troops doing in the middle of nowhere in Africa, or for that matter, anywhere in Africa?
This opens the question. So because there's why do we need these military bases there? And also it turns out that the U.S. has funded and trained, because they saw in Niger in particular, like as a good ally for the U.S., like the most reliable in this area, actually. And so even the top 3 people involved in this coup were trained by the U.S. The guy in charge of the Special Forces Group was trained in Fort Bragg. The other, this guy went to the D.C. What is it, National Security College, whatever they have in D.C. The military.
Oh yes. Well, that's not School of the Americas. That's where we train South American dictators how to torture dissidents.
Right.
Probably the African equivalent now, right?
Got it. So like we funded, we need these military bases there, and then we're training these military people and arming them, and they are, I guess doing a coup, which I suppose the U.S. clearly doesn't support. So I guess that's the downside of intervening constantly in other people's business.
Yeah, shipping a lot of weapons to arm the soldiers who, just at the moment, or until a few moments ago, were under the control of people that we thought they were our stooges, but then they turn out to be independent-minded, or maybe, if they get a better deal, Russian stooges. It reminds me of a Mad Magazine comic that I read. I remember this from the 50s. I thought it was really funny. And it's just exactly what goes on in all these countries. So the setup is they have Gamal Nasser, who was the dictator of Egypt back in those days. And he's sitting around in a room with, bullet holes, caulking the walls and all that. And a swarthy looking Arab comes up to him and says, Gamal Abdel, the Russians have offered us $1 million to be their friend. And Gamal Abdel says, oh, that's very good. And he gets onto the phone and calls the Americans up and he says, don't worry. The Americans just told me they'll offer us $2 million to be their friend. And the swarthy Arab says, Gamal Abdel, you are so smart. And that's just exactly the way it works. I mean, so how stupid are these people in the State Department that they think that they can buy the loyalty of these people? And it's worse than that, because they're training these soldiers and basically giving them competencies which are not needed. Well, got to fight terrorism, but they're making these governments, basically military dictatorships, which if you're a kind of a decent human being and are politically oriented in these countries, you have to want to overthrow the government because they're basically thieves that, they're worse than thieves. I mean, they're active criminals that kill a lot of people in all these countries. So of course, the US is causing terrorism by propping up these horrible governments. And, when I was in college, a huge misallocation of 4 years of my time, and what then wasn't nearly as much money as it is now. At Georgetown University, one of my professors was Jean Kirkpatrick, and she was a rather impressive woman. She became the US ambassador to the UN, and I forget under whose regime she was our ambassador to the UN, but she was a very tough, kind of right-thinking, seemed to be kind of a decent human being, totally unlike Victoria Nuland. And so I remember sitting, the only class of hers I remember, because whatever she was talking about, it was over my head or of no interest to me. But, and so I'm sitting next to my friend Vince, and Kirkpatrick says, yeah, in Africa, very few competent white men can take over the whole country. And of course, this was exactly when the wars were going on in the Congo and, running around with mercenaries doing all kinds of interesting things in the Congo. That's not true anymore, because those African armies have been trained diligently by the US Army now for many years. And, it's not just a bunch of thugs running around with AK-47s shooting randomly. I mean, they're real armies. I mean, so we've done all that. We kind of let the cat out of the bag. We've let the genie out of the bottle, where these countries have absolutely nothing. They have no way of supporting these armies because they produce nothing, except they get foreign aid to support the armies and keep the dictator in office. Anyway, I'm sorry to go on like that, Matt, but it gets down to the question of why is it a big deal in Niger now? It's never been in the past. This stuff happens all the time, all these countries.
Well, this woman who was the highest enlisted person in the Air Force, one thing that she said in this article that was after her visit to the Air Base 201, which is their drone base, she says, she doesn't talk about terrorism stuff there, but she said Africa is an emerging front for strategic competition. And it seems to be this, maybe it is related to the stuff with Russia, because Mali apparently they hired Wagner Group and kicked out the UN peacekeepers that were there, as well as I think the French that were there. So, and Wagner took their place. And this is, I mean, with that foothold, that's it's I guess it's a growing place of competition. And we always heard during when I first heard of the Wagner Group, it was always about their work in Africa. That's how I'd always heard of it. And obviously, it took a front row seat to what was happening in Ukraine over the last year. But it seems like that their real place of action is in Africa. And if this like master sergeant or whatever she was in the Air Force was describing Africa as a place for strategic competition, it seems that that's why they're upset about it. And if Niger was their anchor, was the primary, most reliable party there, and that goes away after losing, Burkina Faso last year, and in Sudan there was a coup last year as well, I believe, or in the last year, and then of course Mali was most recently, I guess, in 2021.
Well, Americans are chronically uninformed, and it's been said that war is nature's way of teaching Americans geography. So now Americans have never, except for stamp collectors, have never heard of any of these countries, and literally can't pick them out on a map. I mean, that's not just an expression, that's the reality. So here's an interesting factet for you. It's that Burkina Faso used to be called Upper Volta. Great name for a country. Used to be, that was its name before until about, when did they change their name? In the 70s sometimes. And so I looked up, what does Burkina Faso mean? Why did they pick that name instead of, was Haute Volta in French, Upper Volta in English? So Burkina Faso means, yes, land of the honest men. I mean, that's a nice name for a country, but here's a country, like all of them, that produces nothing or very little of value, runs on bribery and corruption and revolutions and coups and theft. It's nice that they, have that as an ideal of the land of the honest men. But Niger, so looking into Niger, another part of this is they want to get rid of the colonialists, okay? I can understand that. I mean, they got their own culture, or in a country like that, they've got like 50 or 100 different language groups and ethnic groups and tribes and clans that they're all like the Hatfields and McCoys, quite frankly. So it's hard to get them on the same page. But, they want to get rid of the evil colonialists, but nobody seems to realize that maybe the French didn't like shower wealth upon them on the one hand, but on the other hand, there were very, very few people in those countries when they were taken over by the French, because they can't support many people. There's no agriculture to speak of. I mean, all you can do is milk camels and milk goats. Those are about the only animals that you can read there. And so the population has exploded in all those countries.
Some of the highest birth rates in the world, right there.
Exactly. And the kids survived today. And Niger has gone from, I don't know what it was 50 years ago, just a few million people, to now 25 million people. So quite a few. Of course, the country is like the 15th largest in the world, 750,000 square miles. It's a lot of land, 750,000 square miles. I think I'm right. And it's about the same for Mali, about the same size, about the same population. So that's because, the French brought in things like hospitals and sanitation and electricity and the rest of it, but they're really unhappy and want to, and of course the French are exploiting them now. There's two sides to that story. And, the question is what did they get to allow the Americans who have no legitimate interest, let's admit it, in that part of Africa or any part of Africa, what are they paying the Americans to have those bases there?
Yeah, I don't know. I saw that they said the cost of the base, this air base 201, newest one, was about $100 million. I mean, it's been a pretty inhospitable area, but you know, and they have runways mostly for these for the drones, and then there's apparently they can land transport aircraft there, but otherwise apparently it's pretty harsh and pretty desolate, but it makes a good base of operations for the drones.
So who are they droning and why?
Yeah, I mean, they say that these radical Islamic terrorist groups in the Sahel.
Is,
No.
is that our problem in any way, that you've got some people that are religious fanatics that hate the criminals that are running their government? I mean,
Well, it's obviously not our. I mean, I obviously don't see it as our problem, but it seems like the U.S. sees every potential conflict as an opportunity, you know, in some way. And maybe as this master sergeant or whatever said, you know, it's because if they really see Africa, that part of Africa in particular, as a place of strategic competition, which means China or Russia, then you know that's their opportunity is to they say they provide more stability for the government by taking out their enemies with drone strikes, and in exchange they get some strategic positioning, which I don't know why that's really valuable over Russia or China.
yeah, it's really rather a mystery to me, because I mean, they may find almost anything there tomorrow, but there are really no resources there. There's a little bit of oil in these countries and so forth. But God, why does the US have to stick its nose into the most bizarre places in the world? I guess I'm trying to think the last time I was in that part of the world. I went to Mauritania, which is the next country over from, I've got to look at the map. Is Mauritania, which is on the seacoast, but it's about the same size again. It's, you know, it's 500,000 square miles or something like that. Is it next to Niger, or is there another country? I'm forgetting. Chad, maybe?
I think, let me look here. Yeah, you have Chad. Mauritania is on the other side of Mali.
Oh, no, I thought Mali would be further to the east. Or is Mali actually next to Mauritania?
Yeah, Mali is next to Mauritania.
See, look, even I, who've been to these countries, can't remember which one's which because they're so artificial and so obscure. So I spent a week in Mauritania, flew down there from Paris, and it was very interesting. On that trip, I found that Mauritania, which is one of the Sahel countries that go across that part of Africa, Mauritania was the last country in the world to illegalize slavery.
Really?
Another little interesting fact, they illegalized slavery in 1985, quite recently. 1985. And all of those countries still have slaves today. It's illegal, it's true, but it exists. And when I was there, it was obvious that some of the people, they were the black people, the Arabs, basically have the money, and the black people are the slaves. So it was obvious that, you know, they were slaves or close to it. I enjoyed the trip. I mean, went out in the desert, then, you know, they go out there for the weekend from the city, such as it is, in their tents, and, you know, got to drink camel milk right out of the camel. That was nice. I mean, kind of a fun experience. That and $10 will get me a cup of coffee in Tokyo. But so I spent a week in Mauritania, and then I don't know if it was before or after, I have to look in my diary. I was going to go to Central African Republic, and the reason I was going to go there was to talk to the government for my hobby. Unfortunately, I flew to Paris, where I met with a bunch of Central African Republic officials, including the chief of the National Police Force. But I couldn't fly to, what the hell is the name of their capital? It's not Ouagadougou. It's not, is it Bamako? Or that's another country. I mean, these are exaggerated villages, these places. But I couldn't fly there because the airport was closed, because there were thousands of refugees that had piled into the airport, because there they could avoid being chopped up by machetes. That was what was going on in Central African Republic, which previously was only famous for having a dictator named Bokassa, who was famous for all kinds of unbelievable atrocities. But one of them is keeping human body parts in his refrigerator because he was a cannibal. He styled himself Emperor Bokassa of the Central African Empire, if you would. So I'm sorry I didn't get to make that trip, but it was impossible. And it was probably stupid to even try at that point. So
I think the capital is Bangui. Bangui.
Oh, yeah. I think it's pronounced Bangui, is the way they pronounce it. Yes. Anyway, so I've been encouraging young men that are looking for adventure and to make their fortune to go to Africa. And of course, it might have been easier back in the 60s to become a mercenary. I mean, back then, the going rate, incidentally, this is another little factet. The going rate for white mercenaries with some military experience in Africa in those days, whether we're talking the Congo or in Nigeria, where they were fighting the Igbos in a really nasty civil war, was about $3,000 a month, but actually it was $3,000 plus all you could steal. So I understand the going rate now is more like $10,000 per month. So in real terms, price of mercenaries has gone down.
Yeah. There's a lot more of them now. I mean, a lot more military trained people looking for work.
That's right. And they have better weapons. I mean, there's heavy weapons, and the amount of weapons that are going to wander out of Iraq and Afghanistan, where there's giant piles of this stuff, and Ukraine, which is going to be like a warehouse for weapons to go to Africa for many years to come. It's going to be absolutely wonderful for people like the character that Nicolas Cage played in Lord of War.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's one good movie everybody should see regarding that part of the world, actually. And another good movie, which I really recommend, a fantastic movie with Rod Taylor, it's called Dark of the Sun. Did you ever see that?
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, very interesting time.
Yeah, it really was.
Covered.
Yeah, those times are kind of over. Things have changed now. So what's going to happen? So they picked now, of all times, to make a big deal out of a coup in Niger. Crazy. I mean, and sent Victoria Nuland, our own criminal, there to make things worse. I don't know why. There's nothing there.
So there's nothing there that you could see that would be of, as this Air Force person said, strategic, a battleground for strategic competition. I mean, there's nothing there that is so valuable that it would make sense that area in particular would be staging ground for that.
Well, I don't know who would want the thing. You've got 25 million desperately poor people in a desert. It's the place is a liability. It's not an asset. So I'm sure that there are people in the Pentagon and thereabouts that are figured out it's strategic for some reason. And those drones are flying around. What are they doing? Are they shooting missiles and killing people? I guess they find somebody that they think is a Boko Haram, or who knows? And they're getting the Nigerians and other African countries in to be the cat's paw.
Yep,
You know?
exactly.
So
Yep.
we'll have a war. We'll have a war in the Sahel now. I don't know if we fall into that war in the Congo, because the last time I went to the Congo was years ago now, but it was between two wars, where it is said between the two wars, about 5 million people got. Nobody hears about this stuff. I mean, 5 million people is the number that's thrown around for the number of people that got killed in the Congo, mostly in the eastern Congo on the Rwandan border, that area of the Congo. It's crazy, fomenting these wars and arming these countries that can't support themselves. They all live on foreign aid. It's completely insane. And I'd like anybody that's listening to this, if they read an analysis from anybody that claims to be knowledgeable about this, tell me why this is happening, or why do talking heads say it's important?
Because it does seem like it's the fact that Victoria Nuland herself went there just makes you think that it's an unusually high priority on the list for the State Department. You know, that does, and if there's nothing there, it doesn't seem like there's really any strategic interest. What's the justification for it? It is hard to understand.
I hope Victoria is captured by the natives and treated appropriately.
One can still have dreams, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see what happens with this. I mean, I always watch these. It seems like there's coups happening there all the time. I mean, when this started to unfold more, I was thinking, you know, because as an American who knows nothing about Africa really, I was assuming it was related to what just happened in Sudan, because you know that just happened. It seemed to me not long ago, but I don't know. It's a trend, it seems, and I don't know why we would get involved with it. But I thought I could understand why the French might, you know, just historical interests, but.
Yeah, and the currency that most of these countries in West Africa, the French Francophone countries, use is called the CFA. I forget what it stands for, but it's for Franc Africain, I guess. And this is a currency that all these countries use. It's completely worthless, of course, and it's printed in Paris and run out of Paris. So, and I'm sure it's run to the advantage of Paris, and the locals justifiably resent it. But at least it's kind of stable. And if Chad or Mali or Niger use their own currencies, of course they'll destroy it. They'll print the things up by the bushel basket, the way Zimbabwe did, for the same reason. Because the government's got no other source of income. So you print up money while people take it. So the French are ripping them off, but it's probably better than their own rulers ripping them off and sending the money directly to Switzerland or Paris, you know,
Exactly.
buy a marvelous mansion.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. And notwithstanding the fact that I encourage young men looking to make their fortune to look at Africa, Africa is going downhill. I believe that as the West goes into a major depression, which it's already in, but it's going to get much, much worse, that Africa stands a good chance of going back to the bush. Because if Niger or any of these other countries could support a couple million people, you know, herders and this type of thing, now without foreign aid, because there's no production in the country, you could have actual mass starvation, and it can just be a total disaster. And the West is not going to be in a position to bail them out, nor will the Russians or the Chinese.
Well, while we're talking about Africa, it's probably worth getting an update if you have any updated thoughts on South Africa, because the the guy, one of the guys, I think it's the EFF, is that the name of that political party? Julius something, who basically has chants this, kill the Boers song. And
Oh, yeah, right.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, like 100,000 people in a stadium, and they're all chanting, kill the Boer, right?
yes. And so the first time I saw this was probably 5 years ago, I think. I was shocked by it. I couldn't believe the directness of it. And somehow it got on social media and went viral. Sometime the last couple of weeks, a new, an updated one of it, an updated video of them talking about this. Of course, he says, he's being interviewed by somebody. I saw a clip where he's being interviewed by somebody. He says, but so are you calling for the actual death of white people? And he said, no, we have not yet directly called for the death of white people. And he says, yeah, we're not yet called, but he says it that specific way. He's saying, no, I'm not. He's not saying, no, I'm not calling for that. He's saying, I have not called for that yet. And anyway, so these things went viral, and people were, really disturbed by it. That actually exists, where it's like that direct. Do you think it's getting to a tipping point? I thought that a long time ago, actually. But do you think now, as things continue to fall apart, there's problems in the Western Cape apparently as well, with riots and stuff? I mean, what do you think?
I don't think that South Africa is going to survive in its present form, because the industry that it has there and the power generation and all this type of thing, it's not being maintained. I mean, I have he's died subsequently, but the last time I was in South Africa, his name was Chris, and we had a wonderful 2-week trip. We drove all around the middle of nowhere in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and we went to Botswana too, all of them. Just got in a couple of cars and drove everywhere, game parks, and fantastic. As good a safari as anybody could possibly imagine, totally informally. Anyway, he was an engineer for the railroads, not the engineer that goes choo-choo, but the one that builds the rails and maintains the engines and this type of thing. And when South Africa put in its Black empowerment protocols, Chris said, look, they put a guy over me who actually knew nothing, but he had friends. And of course, he would carry a clipboard and have a pocket protector with lots of pens. And Chris tried to educate him on things he had to know, but he didn't have the background. He didn't have the basic number skills or any kind of skills. And this is what's going on throughout South Africa. This is why they have power blackouts for half of the day, and and there's theft and rioting everywhere. And white people, like the white people that I know, are making the chicken run, getting the hell out. Because when you got poor, ignorant people, getting together and chanting about killing white people, it's time to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, I mean, when they're being explicit about it, that breaks down the whatever sort of moral limitation someone might have to engaging in that activity. When you have 100,000 people chanting about killing these oppressors, the people who oppressed them for so long, is the way that they frame it all.
Yeah, there's a joke. I mean, there's lots of jokes, lots of racial jokes in South Africa. But one joke, which I think is kind of funny, is it's about a South African woman out on the farm, and she goes to one of her servants, and she says, "Twopence, I've heard that all of the blacks are going to kill all the white people. Is that true? You wouldn't kill me, would you, Twopence?" And he says, "Oh, no, ma'am, no, I would not do that. I would go and kill the lady at the neighboring farm, and her boy would come over here to kill you." It's kind of funny.
Yeah, but yeah, but also real.
I'm afraid it is. It's really, this is going to be such an interesting decade.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think there's been the whole all news with Africa rarely gets the attention of Americans, and I
Never.
think if there's one part of the world that Americans have really zero interest in, it's Africa, including these coups and even the crazy stuff you hear coming out of South Africa. But I don't know. Maybe if the whole Wagner group being there, maybe the anti-Russian sentiment might somehow recharge, I guess, people and get them focused on doing bad work in Africa again. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. The fact that Wagner has been hired by the Malians, I guess, or who knows who they've been hired by, that will give Victoria Nuland an excuse to say, we've got to do something about it. Better send a Ranger regiment over there to fight with them.
Exactly. That's or at least get the ECOWAS people to act like Ukrainians. We arm them and send them into the teeth of another army.
That's right. That's right. We can help bankrupt ourselves by buying more advanced Raytheon weapons that the locals, well, they'll figure out how to use them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be the MO. Okay. Well, we'll see what happens with Africa, and I think we'll leave it there for today.
It's all part of the human comedy.
It is, no doubt. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.